Welcome, adventurers! It turns out that Omega is not the true final boss of Loop Hero. It is actually the avatars of the Four Quarters crew hiding in the shadows of every expedition you've ever undertaken. The game's developers placed themselves into the game as a secret boss, and this time they are not memeing like they were with the Frog King. This is the most complex and difficult encounter in the entire game. So, in this episode of Loop Hero Academy, I'm going to break down how the encounter works, then we'll look at how to spawn the secret boss portal, and finally we'll examine how to beat the devs at their very own game. Alright, here these lovely people are. We have discovered them in their hiding spot, and they already want to kill us. So, what is each of these avatars bringing to the battle? Beginning here with TheRandom. Now, these guys do scale with level. This is a time where I was trying to fight them on an extremely early loop to see how much that scaling was. It turns out fighting them super early is crazy hard. Their raw stats are high enough that they will beat you if you fight them extremely early, but then they will also get significantly stronger on the higher loops as well to keep up with your gear progression. So this challenge is going to be quite difficult no matter what level whatever loop count you end up fighting them on. So kind of disregard the health, damage, and attack speed of the characters. Just kind of look at how they scale between them. There are a few of the characters that are a lot healthier than the other characters, and some of them are more damage dealers. But just don't take these raw numbers as what they always are when you face them. So going into TheRandom's skills, he starts out here with Loving Life. This means that when you are the Necromancer class, you always target him first, and you deal double damage to him. So he will always be killed first by the Necromancer. Next, he has Perfectionism. He gets +5 damage for each unoccupied camp tile. Now yes, by camp tile, this means all the way back at the base camp. If you have a lot of black area over there, you haven't filled it in with buildings, then he is going to be getting more damage. He is also Story Lover. He has -1% damage for each unlocked monster article. So, the more that you have experienced the story and unlocked the monster articles in the encyclopedia, the less damage he will be doing to you. He also has Useless Debate. When his health is lower than 60%, and this is once a battle, he causes the entire team to argue for 3 seconds, which means that they do not take any actions for those 3 seconds. So this is a debuff similar to the Confuse trait that the goblins have. Jumping down to Blinch. Blinch has Teamwork, meaning that he is always the second target of a battle. So your first target is going to be decided by your class, and then your second target is going to be Blinch every single time, and then your third and fourth targets are random. He also has Bunny Hop. His evasion is equal to loops completed this expedition times 2. So this is one of the factors of scaling. The longer that you go, it means that his evasion is going to get really, really high if you choose to wait a long time and scale up to be able to fight them. And because he is always your second target, you could end up getting hung up on trying to get through him because he is also one of the more healthy members of the team. He is kind of the big roadblock if you allow this evasion to get too high. Then he has Musica Universalis, meaning that it changes something about his attack power. I am unsure what this trait is. I wasn't able to pick it up. With the Frog King, they similarly had an ability that was just had question marks over it, not saying what it really did. Well, it was very easy to figure out that it impacted evasion. Here they are telling you that it's impacting his attack power, and it seems to have something to do with music. I am unsure if this means that if you turn your volume up, he will do more or less damage. That is my guess. Blinch is the member of the team who did the original soundtrack, which is incredible, by the way. But we need to finish out here. He also has Procrastination. He has a 30% chance to skip the attack. So again, a debuff there as his final ability. Jumping on to Finlal, here we have Gullible. This means that he is going to be targeted first by the Rogue, and again, the Rogue will do double damage to him. His next ability is Speedrun, plus 1% attack speed per filled in tile this run. This means that the more tiles that you fill in, he is getting a lot more attack speed. His attack speed is going to hit pretty ridiculous levels, whereas here, if you are fighting him very early and have not filled in much of the map, then his attack speed is going to be a lot lower, and he's going to attack fairly slowly, but he can turn into a crazy damage dealer if you allow his attack speed to really scale up. He is also casual. He has minus 25% defense for each chapter after the first one. This means that if you are doing this run on the first chapter, he is going to be pretty tanky. If you do this on the later chapters, his armor value is going to be dropped way down. So on chapter 4, you should be doing true damage. It'll be either that or he'll have minus 75% defense. So doing this on a later chapter will be more beneficial for getting through Finlal here. I will talk a little bit later on which chapter I think that you should be trying to fight these guys on, but you do have this scaling factor to take into consideration when you're picking your chapter. And then not bug, but feature, when health reaches 1%, either gives up or gets 100% health and fully heals. So this is a major RNG factor in this battle, whether Finlal will just give up or whether he is going to come back as strong as ever, especially if he has had his attack speed amped up and it's one of their main damage dealers. Having him come back could be incredibly frustrating, especially if you are bringing in the rogue and you're trying to get through him first. You are forced to fight him first because of that target priority, and then he just comes back and you are then stuck fighting all 4 of them for even longer. Alright, as you can see, things are getting incredibly complicated here, and we saved the worst for last. Here is Deceiver. He has the trait Pacifist, which means he is the first target of the warrior, and the warrior will do double damage to him. This double damage appears as critical hits when your character is dealing damage. Now, his second trait is Grind. His health is equal to the number of monsters slain on this save times 2. The game has a stats tracker for you, and however many monsters you have killed in your entire save game, multiplied by 2, is the Deceiver's health. So for those of you that have been slogging through the game and have made it quite far and are trying to unlock all of the final details, Deceiver is going to have an enormous health pool, truly staggering to try and deal with, but there are ways to be able to deal with it, such as his next trait, Item Lover, minus 2% health for each empty slot in the camp supply. So once again, this is going back to the camp. This is going to the camp supply specifically, where you equip those little random items that you pick up while going around the loop, and they give you pretty minuscule value. So for this battle, unequipping them just so that you lower the health by a significant percentage on Deceiver is definitely worth it. His final trait is Deadline, plus 100% attack speed when health is lower than 20%. And because his health pool is so large, it is pretty dangerous to have him under that 20% threshold, because he's probably going to be there for a little while just with how enormous his health pool is. And then he is going to get really scary there with that plus 100% attack speed. This is also true especially if he is the last one that you were trying to finish off, as can often be the case because of how much more health he has. And once you get him down to just that one-on-one, he is still a threat because of Deadline. Whew, that does sound like a complicated encounter. Well, now to add onto that what it takes to spawn their portal. You have to cross the beams of 6 different cards on a single space. At this point in the game, you must be familiar with how roadside tiles show a blue highlighted area on the tiles they affect, either in a unique status effect or a range in which they can spawn monsters. You need to get 6 such effects to overlap on a single path space. My understanding is any card that generates this highlighted blue area of effect will contribute. This is again my gameplay from attempting the boss battle on a very early loop. I like using it as an example because the map is pretty empty and it's clear to see how I've overlapped my tiles. Here I'm using Chrono Crystals, Battlefields, Road Lanterns, Blood Groves, Vampire Mansions, and Temporal Beacons. I believe normal beacons, armories, outposts, and storm temples can also all contribute, and maybe a few other cards I'm not thinking of at the moment. I've seen different configurations work, but have not tried all the combinations. I chose these 6 tiles specifically because I enjoy using them throughout my run. They all contribute in areas other than just this cluster, and I find uses for them in other combinations as well, so I tried to pick them to keep my deck effective and so that I didn't have too many dead cards, whereas I think that some of the other cards really do not have very much use. Once you have the required 6 overlapping fields, then blue sparks will start to flash from the ground on the specific tile where they all overlap. Now you have to hit that tile with an oblivion, and the boss portal will spawn. Note that only one portal can exist on the map at once, so if the chapter boss has their portal up, deal with them first before using the oblivion. Now, when the secret boss portal spawns, a unique music track actually starts playing, and I feel like this gives support to the idea that this is the true ending of the game, because they went in and they gave it all of this extra support showing the full portal and the extra music, designated music. These are things that none of which were included with the Frog King secret boss that we encountered earlier. Alright, now prep for this encounter begins even before you enter the expedition here at the camp tile, or the camp location, I'm sorry. Now, the bosses have scaling factors both for empty space that you have left in the camp and empty space that you leave in the camp supply. So, what I was finding was that these enemies, because of some of those scaling factors, were just way too hard to deal with, and so what I ended up doing is placing down a number of mud huts. Now the key here is that they are the cheapest building that doesn't have a build limit that will also contribute to the camp supply. Every single one of these huts adds +1 to the number of equipable supply items. It would be cheaper just to fill in the camp if I was building farms or if I was just throwing down forest tiles, but the resources here for the mud hut are all very easy to access, very cheap to synthesize with alchemy, and there's no limit on building this, and these other buildings do not contribute to the maximum supply. So filling in these camp tiles is decreasing the damage from the random, and then increasing the supply number is, in a roundabout way, decreasing the health, that incredibly large health pool of Deceiver, because I am not actually utilizing all of the spaces. I've started moving in some items for other runs, but basically when I was doing runs designated to taking out these bosses, I was only leaving in the old painting, which gives you increased damage to bosses by 4%. I felt like that was worth it to keep rather than trying to reduce Deceiver's health by 2%, but all of these other empty items combining together are cutting Deceiver's health way, way, way down. So if I was able to just pop all of these off, I could have his health reduced by about 75%, and I could have go even a little farther if I built some more mud huts. And if you find that you are struggling with this encounter, then go ahead. You are going to want to fill everything in and try and be as efficient as possible. Now also, these warehouses are very important because they increase your camp supply by 10 each, so they count for 10 of these mud huts in terms of reducing Deceiver's health. The catch here is that these warehouses have to be built connected to the supply depot, so if you built the supply depot early and then surrounded it with other key buildings, you're going to have to end up dismantling them and rebuilding them, finding new locations for them. I had to find a new location for my Intel Center, I believe. I ended up switching where that was placed to make room for another warehouse so that I opened up that extra supply space. In terms of the items that you're bringing here for the supply, I felt like none of them was really bringing a boost that was significant enough to warrant not being empty for the sake of this battle. That minus 2% health on Deceiver seems really, really useful. Except here, the old paintings, incredibly useful, 4% damage to bosses. I felt like that was a better trade than having the minus 2% health on Deceiver. And so then all these empty spaces effectively just reducing Deceiver's health. I would actually use the Count's chairs if you have them, because having that extra vampirism on your characters is going to be pretty useful. And I also like these alchemist shelves, being able to increase your potion capacity, also letting you have more longevity in that final battle against the bosses. Okay, the next step that we have to look at is what deck are we building? We are pretty limited here because we have to bring enough tiles with effects that are going to combine to be able to spawn the boss portal. So we have to take Vampire Mansion, Battlefield, Bloodgrove. Also, I'm bringing Bookery Road Lantern, Chrono Crystals, and then we've got the Temporal Beacon that we are adding in so that we get the combination of 6 effects on a single tile. Now, there are other tiles here that I believe will contribute. I think that any tile that causes that blue area of effect to spawn, so Smith's Forge, Outposts, Storm Temples, Normal Beacons could all contribute, but I do not find as much use for these, especially when I'm doing runs with the Warrior, which was my favorite out of the classes to use. Everything else here, I enjoy how it combines outside of just building that single cluster, so it is all chosen intentionally to support my run as a whole and not just having dead cards that are only being used for that spawning of the bosses. I think if I was to modify this any from the example runs that I was doing, it would probably be to trade the Road Lantern for the Outpost. The challenge here is that the Outpost only is offering a single adjacency space to contribute to the combination of tiles, so it's easier to fit the Road Lantern nearby, but the Outpost is going to give you that assist in the boss battle, so props to the Outpost for offering that, making it just a little bit more valuable, even though you have to be more careful about where you are spawning in the bosses. Everything else flows pretty well together. We have the village to be able to give us that health boost. I like placing one right before the portal so that we can gain health right before fighting the bosses, and also pairing one up early with the Vampire Mansion nearby with my campfire so that it spawns the set of ghouls that will allow me to pick up a lot of loot and experience from that. And then for my other tiles on the path, I'm bringing Grove and Ruins. The Ruins being able to spawn a lot of Scorchworms, give a bunch of resources, and the Grove, in general, the Rat Wolves are pretty easy enemies to deal with. Battlefields and Blood Groves offer great treasure troves in the form of chests from the battlefields, and the Flesh Golems drop incredible loot from the Blood Groves. The Bookery helps me thin out my hand, get the exact cards that I am looking for, and get rid of those trashy forests so that I can focus on thickets and drop deserts in favor of sand dunes. Chrono Crystals, I ended up falling in love with Chrono Crystals from this. They were not something that I had used very much previously, but because they accelerate how quickly enemies spawn, they can really jumpstart your early loops to being much more effective. Placing this next to Grove so that you're getting double the Rat Wolves, more easy enemies to deal with, but double the loot. And as I said, I had been using Road Lanterns in my examples instead of Outposts, but I feel like these are fairly interchangeable. The Road Lantern is going to make your cycles a little bit easier by reducing the max number of enemies because you are pairing in vampires and temporal, the Watchers from the Temporal Beacons, making those encounters pretty challenging, so reducing it to 4 instead of 5 enemies. The Outpost would give you the helping hand of one of the guards. Then our Forest, River, Desert, Suburb combo. This is the favorite spread of mine, allowing a lot of attack speed, and then you can control the attack speed by starting to reduce it with the combination of Desert and River. And then the Suburbs are pretty indispensable for giving you a lot of experience and a bunch of traits, which I value pretty highly as any class you are playing to tackle these bosses. The Oblivion, again, is essential for spawning the bosses. You have to fire it onto the spot with all the sparks to be able to get their portal, and it is just incredibly useful in general. It's going to be able to take care of those bandit camps, which are pretty problematic if you're using the villages, and it also takes care of the village question marks that pop up from the forests, which, again, when you are going with a high attack speed build, which is my preferred build here, they can be pretty problematic as well with those wooden soldiers on the counterattacks hitting back harder than you are hitting them. Finally, we have the Temporal Beacon. Because it has the larger area of effect, it is able to easily contribute to spawn the boss portal, and it's also going to add in the Watchers, which are a fun extra enemy, and combining them with the Bookery, giving you the Watcher and Mages. They're not too hard to deal with, but they drop some pretty good loot. You could exchange this for the Beacon, but I don't really see much advantage for having the extra movement speed or attack speed. and I prefer getting the temporal beacon and those extra enemies slotted into the encounters instead. This also leaves you open to take your gold card of choice. They don't contribute to your max hand size of 15. For most of my runs, I was not using any of the gold cards though. Okay, now let's get into what it takes to actually beat these bosses, because this encounter is crazy hard. I am playing this encounter on chapter 1. As I said, there is an argument for playing it on later chapters because that will nerf the strength of one of the bosses, but I feel like that nerf on a single boss is not significant enough to warrant changing out what chapter I am playing on. I'm taking chapter 1 because then the progress up to fighting the boss is much easier, and being able to very easily pick which loop I am fighting the bosses on whenever it matches with whenever I feel confident in the build that I have is what I really enjoyed about going in with chapter 1. I played around on a few other chapters as well, but I had most of my success on chapter 1. Let me know in the comments if you guys have more or less success on what chapters you run your attempts on. I think the biggest decision here is which class we are going to bring to tackle these bosses, because every single class is going to begin the battle targeting a different one of the enemies, and they each impact the battle in such different ways. So if we bring in the rogue, we will be up against Finlal first. That means that we are up against one of the enemies that deals, he's one of their largest sources of damage, so taking him out first can be pretty beneficial. He is the one who, if he gains percentage attack speed based on how many tiles you fill in. So if you spend a run where you allow yourself to scale up, then his attack speed is going to be insane. Now, what are the downsides of playing the rogue and trying to tackle this guy first? Well, he has the ability that he can flip a coin, basically, when you are about to kill him, and either he will increase his health and heal all the way up, or he will die. This means that if you are trying to tackle him first and he continues to get back up, he can really handicap your run, and because then all the rest of them are still attacking you, you really need to start getting a few of them eliminated to be able to make it through the battle, and the longer that you are fighting all 4 of them, the worse you are going to do. So that is kind of handicapping the rogue. If we look at the encounter in general, the rogue is challenged here because of their lack of survivability. They get just a base amount of vampirism. It is not enough to really sustain them through a lot of damage. Even if you are bringing the armory and have the amulet for the magic health shield, in a drawn out boss battle, that shield is gone pretty quickly, and it's really challenging to keep your health high enough on the rogue to be able to sustain through a longer fight. If you invest heavily in evasion to be more survivable as the rogue, then it's going to take this huge chunk out of your stamina bar, and you're not going to be able to be dishing out hits as often as you would like. You're going to deplete that stamina bar and then have limited attack speed and evasion, and so that's when the enemies can really do a number on you. So I think that the rogue is really going to struggle here. I think it is still possible for the rogue to be able to win because the rogue scales really well into the later levels, so if you come in with just super strong items, you can still make a strong run of it, but the limited survivability is really going to handicap the rogue in this situation. If we choose to bring in the Necromancer, then we are going to be facing off against the Random as our first enemy. Now, this has some significant advantages because the Random is the enemy that has the useless debate ability. When their health is lower than 60%, they cause the entire team to argue for 3 seconds, effectively pausing the battle. So, your dream situation as the Necromancer is to enter the battle and then quickly reduce the Random to 60% health. Once they hit that, then they're going to cause all the enemies to pause attacking you, which can let you really pump up the size of your skeleton army. And then you can progress from there with a numbers advantage against the bosses once you have eliminated the Random. Now, I ran a few attempts with the Necromancer against the bosses, and I found it to be pretty challenging. Part of it was that I did not get really good builds of the Necromancer together. I was having trouble getting the Art of Control trait to bump up my number of max skeletons, so I was not operating with as large of a skeleton horde as I would like, and I found that the bosses were able to defeat my skeletons quickly enough that I was not getting I was not rolling over into being able to sustain a large number of summons on the board at once to be able to take them on. They were doing enough damage that they were getting through all of them and then just limiting me to only a few on the board at a time, and that is not a winning situation for the Necromancer. So again, I think that the Necromancer can be successful, but I was not having the best luck with him. So that leaves us to talk about the Warrior. Now, the Warrior is going to be going up against the Deceiver first, and this might seem like an extremely daunting enemy because the Deceiver is the one who has his health scaled off of the number of monsters slain on your entire save file times 2. So his health pool is going to be enormous compared to the other enemies, at least he is for me. Now, you are able to turn this into an advantage for you with the Warrior, and I'm going to tell you exactly how. This is because you also deal double damage to your primary foe. So the Warrior is going to start targeting the Deceiver, and then he is going to do double damage to the Deceiver, and this is going to appear as critical hits on them during the battle. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit because the Warrior is the class that I was using the most and finding the most success with, so this is going to start going into exactly how I was building my Warrior. But effectively, because the Warrior is able to build a really high vampirism stat, and because you are getting this double damage against the Deceiver, then your vampirism becomes enormous. So this makes the Warrior able to sustain against incredible amounts of damage that the bosses are putting out. And then, because the Deceiver has such a high health pool, he is likely to still be the final enemy that I am still fighting at the end of the encounter. So throughout the entire battle, I've been getting this enormously exaggerated vampirism that is healing me up through all of the other enemies' attacks. So to recap our class discussion, I don't think that any class is excluded from being able to beat these bosses, but I had the most success with the Warrior. I think that the Necromancer can handle it, and I think that the Rogue would be able to, but I think that the Rogue is going to have the largest challenge, and from my runs, it seems like the Warrior had the easiest time of managing these guys. Okay, let's go a little into exactly what I built on my successful runs. So, I was building my landscapes around roughly the same formation in all of my attempts. I found that this was a pretty successful way to build. I keep a very large set of suburbs and towns right off of the river initially to be able to pick up a lot of experience and gain some extra traits, and then I keep thickets on the other side of the river so that I can improve my attack speed. I am using bookeries in this run because they can also contribute to spawning the bosses, and they also just improve the quality of the cards in your hand so that you're able to pick and choose more exactly what you want to put down and when you want to get it down. I was trying to keep my attack speed around 50% or so, and so after I had set off these initial 6 or so thickets next to the river, I would start putting the river next to deserts, which changes it to oasis. So the oasis is cutting the opponent's attack speed by 1 and my attack speed by 0.5. That means that I am able to still keep a high attack speed and a significantly higher attack speed than my opponents because I'm also bringing the forest and because I'm not affected as much as my opponents. Because this battle is up against 4 bosses, having their attack speed reduced is significantly advantageous. Throughout the path, I am trying to create a number of encounters that are all manageable and really relying on the Chrono Crystals to spam out enemies so that I am able to get over-leveled loot, get the best loot possible per the level that I am on. Very early on, I will place a village next to a vampire's mansion that is close to the campfire so that my crossbowman can help me make it through that otherwise challenging encounter, and that gives me a shot in the arm for being able to set up my build in the early levels, and then later on will provide a safe space for a lot of healing as I transition to harder encounters around that area. I initially tried to get the bosses to spawn close to the campfire to see if the crossbowmen would help me, but they do not. I think this is clear because they actually spawn a portal and take you to effectively like their own boss arena, and so that is far enough away that the crossbowmen are not able to contribute. Remember that combining bookeries with temporal beacons and also with vampire mansions can result in spawning Watcher mages and vampire mages. These are extremely challenging enemies. Here on chapter 1, not so much. I am feeling pretty overleveled for this chapter because of your passive stat gain from the camp and camp improvements, and the enemy stats are just not scaled as much as they are in Chapter 4, which is what I have been playing on most recently. Now, detailing my build for the bosses specifically, bringing in the warrior and fighting multiple enemies in this encounter, my focus is on counterattack. Getting the counterattack chance to be able to counter off of all 4 enemies attacking me increases my attack speed more than just increasing my attack speed stat. This is also how I am able to get at the weaker enemies around the Deceiver while I keep on using my primary attacks against the Deceiver to be able to pick up my enormously exaggerated vampirism stat. So also my vampirism stat is very important. I want to have that pretty high, even at the cost of some of the other stats, so that I am able to get the maximum sustain going with the rest of my build. And you are getting vampirism off of your counterattack stat, so there is a nice natural synergy there. Getting the damage all stat was also a priority for me because it is going to be spreading to all of the enemies. Getting that damage all multiplied by 4 is very beneficial for this battle, and being able to weed out these weaker enemies behind the Deceiver is quite useful. I don't care too much about evasion in my builds. I do end up with a little bit in both of my successful runs, and I think that it is definitely helping me. In one of my runs, I was very careful keeping my attack speed on the lower end so that I was not becoming exhausted, while on another run, I did have my attack speed high enough that I was exhausting myself, so I was able to be successful in either case. But because this is going to be a drawn-out fight, you want to be careful about that stamina bar, not try and over-level your attack speed stat, because that is going to leave you very vulnerable when your stamina actually runs out and you have to wait for it to recharge. You take a huge penalty to attack speed and a huge penalty to evasion, and so the bosses are able to do quite a number on you while you are in that vulnerable state. My final dirty little trick here is going for the trait Their Own Peril. This gives you a 60% chance to reflect a ranged shot into a random enemy. And I would set up a ruins across from their portal. Set up alongside with a chrono crystal, and then there is going to be 4 scorch worms that are all firing into the battle, and I have a 60% chance of taking those ranged shots and hurling them at the bosses, greatly increasing my DPS. The other traits here that I am prioritizing bringing with the warrior is either of the abilities that gives him crowd control, so battering ram. Being able to start out with stuns is very nice, though less useful in the boss encounter than it is with just sustain going throughout the loop. Picking up Shield Master for a 10% chance upon hit of stunning a target for 1 second, extremely useful, especially with your high counterattack stat. Buckler is incredible, giving you health back on your counterattacks, which anytime that you can synergize another stat into that counterattack is going to be very, very useful. Blade of Dawn is pretty good because you're getting that extra damage across all of them. This is very effective at being able to weed out the bosses that have lower health. Finally, Survivalist is usually an incredible stat, and I do take it because it's better than some of the other offerings here. The ones related to defense I really find underwhelming for the warrior, but in this case, because I am not bringing mountains, the Survivalist trait is not super useful. It means that if my health falls below 30%, my regeneration is doubled. I'm not focusing on improving my max health or my regeneration, so Survivalist gives me minimal returns, but it is still something that I end up picking up in a few of these runs. Out of the common traits that may crop up, there are a few that really stand out as being beneficial for this battle. Amacorn's Technique. This is from the Lich +1 Resurrection Charge. This cannot be stated how useful it is for boss battles. Being able to come back yet again with a full recharge is really, really good. It scales particularly well with the warrior, who is able to increase their damage based on how long a battle has drawn out. Gift of Blood with the on-hit Blood Lightning is really good if you have an extremely high vampirism chance, which for this build I highly recommend, so it's going to synergize very well with Gift of Blood, and that's going to amp up your damage. Final shoutouts go to Blind Fury and Lightning Fast. Blind Fury is only going to give you that extra boost once in this battle, but when things are coming down to the wire, as they are almost guaranteed to when you're up against the Deceiver or whichever boss is last to be eliminated, but for me it was pretty much always the Deceiver. Having that Blind Fury to get those rapid attacks out with the Vampirism stat and scoring crits on the Deceiver means that you can pump up your health really quickly and then hopefully be able to go over the edge if things are getting really close towards the end. Alright, let's actually watch this play out. We roll up into the boss battle, feeling pretty confident I'm tackling this on loop 7. We've got the flame worms firing into us. On this run, I actually do not have the reflection option. But again, I am just scoring these crits. My sustain is through the roof with my vampirism, scoring the counterattacks and using damage all to damage the weaker enemies, throwing them into the argument, which caused them to pause for a little bit, which let me sustain all the way back up. The Deceiver's health pool is just so enormous, he's just sitting there taking absolutely everything. This is my resurrection from the graveyard. You gotta be able to use all of the resources at your disposal to be able to take on this challenge. Blade of Dawn coming in for a little bit of help for me there. And here, this is awesome. When you defeat that bottom left enemy, he is the enemy who holds the loot drop for the encounter. So, and he dropped incredibly over-leveled loot. I immediately went to see what he had given me to see if it was going to be enough to help me defeat his 2 remaining friends. And it was significantly better than what I was equipping, so I'm just mousing over here to figure out which of these goodies that he's dropped for me I'm going to use to destroy his friends. Upgrading my weapon and my ring here. He unfortunately did not give me a shield, but pretty much everything else was better, so I switched it out, and I did not need the damage all from the mace anymore because I'm down to just 2 enemies, so being able to focus my damage helped improve my build even that much more. Now it is just Deceiver and the Bard left. The longer this encounter goes on, the more the warrior's damage is amped up, which is getting turned into a crit for double damage, and all of that is feeding into the vampirism, which is why my health bar is just unstoppable at this point. And so now it's just one-on-one, and we take it home. Feels very good. Feels very good indeed. Now, the Deceiver is not to be trifled with when he is one of the last remaining enemies, because he does have that deadline ability, which is going to double his attack speed when his health is beneath 20%. But at that point, because I had eliminated all of his friends, I was able to handle him one-on-one. So there you have it. That is how to find and defeat the developers at their own game. The secret boss at the end of Loop Heroes was the 4 Quarters team all along, and as you manage to defeat them, they decide to just reboot the game and throw you into it all over again. Now, I have managed to beat them twice so far, and they have given unique dialogue each time. I am curious. I'm going to try and keep going to see if there is any more tidbits and secrets left along the way, or if it is just going to start repeating at this point forward. I am unsure. It feels like it could go either way, and I'm not going to keep on pushing the dialogue if it continues to repeat. I'm going to take that as the end. But there it is with these tips. I hope that you guys are able to enjoy tackling this encounter and that you know what you are getting into. It is going to be very hard, and it is going to require some definite specific stats to aim for in your build, but I think that you can manage to take them down and be able to prepare yourself for success to be able to take them down consistently. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more Loop Hero content from me. Thanks guys, and have a good one.